There we go.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cindy Fields, and I'm the Small Business Development Center Director at Virginia Highlands Community College in Abingdon, Virginia. I am joined today by Mandy Archer, who is the Director at Blue Ridge Crossroads SBDC in Galax, Virginia, and Margie Douglas, who is the Director at Southwest Virginia Community College SBDC. We also have some of their staff joining us today, and we welcome you all. So the way this really started was that we began to all have inquiries from different individuals in Southwest Virginia regarding supply chain issues from farmers who were having difficulties trying to get their animals slaughtered. And so it always seems that in some cases, if we have one individual that's interested in doing a project, suddenly we're all being questioned about the same project. And because of the complexity of this issue, we decided to enlist the help of our wonderful Chappelle Business Strategies and Penny to help us out with this series. And we quickly decided that one workshop would not be able to cover everything that we needed to cover in being able to educate people. So we are recording this so that we may send you the slide deck and we may send you the recordings so that you can refer back to that. I'm not sure who all we have joining today, what stage that you are in the process. This is really meant to focus on those who are interested in this type of business and who are really at the very base stage of the beginning such a business idea as this. So I'm going to turn it over to Penny because Penny has been gracious and put a lot of time and effort in developing these resources, and let her introduce our speaker for the day. We are always here for you all to help you in any way that you may need us. If you're not set up as a client with your local SBDC, we would recommend that you connect with your local SBDC. We have 27 centers throughout the state of Virginia, and we have a lot of resources, a lot of different counselors that can help you along the way and make it a lot easier for you. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Cindy. I'm going to start sharing my screen so we can get right into the presentation. I'm assuming everyone can see my screen that says starting a meat processing facility. Good, great. Okay, so thank you for the introduction. And yes, this first session, the first of 3 sessions, we're going to be covering just kind of a general overview of what's involved in starting a meat processing facility. So as Cindy said, if you are in the early stages, the early thought processes, you're hearing all of the chatter out there about the need for processing facilities in Southwest Virginia, and you're wondering if this is an endeavor you'd like to explore, then this is the perfect workshop for you. Oops. Get my cursor back over here. So we're going to be talking, do a little introduce myself. I'll introduce our speaker for today, Tony Banks. We're going to do a little bit of the market overview. Where is the market in Southwest Virginia? What's the status at this point? Some things that you need to know. Talk about research and feasibility, covering a business plan, and then the workshops that are coming up next. So this is being sponsored by the Southwest region of the SBDCs of Virginia. So we're appreciative of them for asking me to put this information together for you. And I'm going to go through the slides fairly quickly, allow time for questions and allow time for our guest speaker to interject and infuse his wealth of knowledge also. Just to give you a quick background as to who I am the owner and founder of Chappelle Business Strategies. I myself am an entrepreneur. I've very experienced in startups, and I'm an insatiable learner. And that's a good thing because this was an entirely new topic for me. I grew up around out on farms, but this was something new. So I've thoroughly enjoyed digging into this, and I'm looking forward to sharing what I've learned. Today, as I mentioned, we have Tony Banks. He is from the Virginia Foundation for Agriculture Innovation and Rural Sustainability. He has over 30 years of experience in business development and rural economic and policy analysis. So he's, over the past 3 years, facilitated different strategic discussions of new different market opportunities for producers here in Southwest Virginia. And he's assisted cooperatives, feasibility studies, and mentored small businesses. So we're going to, I know speaking with him, I gained a lot of knowledge. So we'll see what he has to share in just a few moments. Quickly, let's take a look at what is the market status right now in Virginia. And there's some interesting statistics that I pulled from a couple of different sources. One is that Virginia has actually had a reduction in beef cattle in the state. In 2021, it was down 595,000 from the previous year. Now, as we all know, the pandemic has kind of thrown all numbers askew, but it does seem that there was a downward trend even prior to the pandemic. Beef and pork production, as far as the products themselves, have dropped 26% in the 19 years up to 2019. Poultry, on the hand, does continue to increase as consumers are kind of shying away from the ever increasing price of beef and red meats and turning to the less expensive poultry product options. So if you are thinking about looking into starting a meat processing facility, and like any business, it requires a great deal of time, energy, and resources. Because it involves food products, of course, there are government regulations that have to be factored in also. So the 4 basic things that we're going to kind of cover in these workshops, and first of all, is research. Understanding what is actually the viability of venturing into a meat processing facility. How viable is it in the region that you're looking, the area that you're looking to start such an enterprise? Not only from a consumption standpoint, but from a production standpoint as well. Then there other things that you will need to consider, of course, is your business plan. This needs to be one of the first things you start working on, because this is going to help you obtain funding. And it's also, of course, a good business plan just makes it much easier to be successful in any endeavor. There's regulations and funding that need to be considered, and the following 2 workshops we'll be covering those next week at the same time, same channel. We will be discussing the regulations. We'll have an expert on the panel that day also to get into that. And then the 3rd week, the 27th, we'll have some decks talking about funding. So we're not going to get too deep into either of those topics, but just to know that we will be diving into it deeper in the following weeks. So when it comes to research, what are the things you need to research and understand? Supply and demand, of course, is key. Determining and how much supply is out there, but also how much are you going to be able to secure in your new venture? Understanding how much you need in order to make this a viable year-round business, and then researching to see, is the level of production there? Is the level of cattle, if I was looking at primarily cattle in this particular session, is there enough really for you to sustain your business year round? And then what is the market demand? So are you going to have enough supply to keep you busy year round, but it's just farmers who are looking for a facility to process their own cattle for their own use? Or Are you looking to actually supply grocers, the consumers? What is your thought process? That's what you need to research to make sure that you really have a true demand and supply. That will help determine what type of facility, slaughter, processing, voluntary, going to be custom exempt. What is your facility going to provide? What services? And then there are a couple of different facility options. There's, of course, a stationary plant that we're most familiar with. There are a very few mobile units in this country, but not enough to really give us a lot of data as to how successful and the viability of that, but we'll touch on that in a few moments. And then, of course, other things to consider are zoning, accessibility to main roads and things like that. Some other considerations are your knowledge base. You know, what is your knowledge of the industry overall? Is it a well-rounded knowledge? And if not you personally, those on your team, those that are going to be going into this venture with you, do you have enough knowledge assembled in your team to make this business opportunity really work? Do you have the skills, the business acumen? And then there's another consideration that we'll touch on again later too, is the talent pool. This is a pretty specialized business. And is there sufficient talent available to you to process the number of head of cattle and so forth that you want to process, that to sustain the sort of to support the size of facility that you're envisioning? And of course, community support is really important, you know, not just from the local municipalities, but just the population as a whole. You want to make sure that the community supports your endeavors wherever you plan to put such a facility. We talked about supply and demand. How much supply is there? I know we've all heard the anecdotal chatter out there that farmers are saying, I can't, I have too many head, I have to wait too long to get my cattle processed. But do we have actual hard numbers to that? That's something that's critical before diving into such an operation. And is that supply available year round? Because once you start a business like this, the bills aren't seasonal. They come year round. And so you need to make sure that you're able to have production going year round that is sufficient to not just pay the bills, but to actually make this a profitable business. How much product is actually needed? Well, the size of your operation will be determined by a number of factors, such as the supply that you're able to get commitment for. It will be determined by the talent you're able to acquire, the staffing for front office work, as well as the actual production, slaughter, and butchering, processing, packaging, and so forth. And you have to factor in all of the costs and determine where your profitability is. And we'll touch on that also. If you are looking to make this a to consumer business and not just a custom exempt just to service farmers, is there really a true client base? Have you researched that? Do you know what is the actual demand in this area? Or where can you where can you put your products? Are there restaurants, stores, consumers, farmers markets? How are you going to actually sorry, my screen blinked. How are you going to actually get your product out there? Do you know if you really have a firm client base? So let's talk just briefly. Again, we're not going to get too deeply into this, but just to kind of give you an idea of what you're looking at if you're looking into getting into processing. For a very small plant, you'll see that the total expenses is around $300,000 a little over $300,000. For a small, a little over double that. And then if you're looking at a much larger facility, that's over 5 million in expenses. What does that equate to in numbers of head that you need to process as far as beef cattle? Very small, just to break even, you'll need 600 head annually. For a small facility, you'll need just under 1,500 head annually. And of course, if you're thinking really large, we're looking at over 11,000 head annually. Now, in order to start showing some profit and getting some cash flow, then we need to take these numbers into account also. So it's a pretty significant commitment that you need to have. And it needs to be spaced equitably throughout the year to make it viable, right? So that you don't have all 600 or 1,100 head coming in 2 months. It needs to be something that's manageable. For startup comparison, let's look at, these are the estimated averages in 2020. A small scale facility would process around 1,500 beef, another 1,400 of other species, with an average annual revenue of $674,000. The capital investment for that scale of an operation is over $1 million, $1.3 million. Now, that was a 2020 number. As we know, the pandemic has exponentially increased the cost of particularly building materials and supplies. So you could expect that in today's market, even if you're looking at next year or whatever, it's going to be significantly more. So this is another reason you really need to do a feasibility study and make sure that you're getting hard numbers as far as the actual costs for startup and investing in this. If we'll touch briefly on a mobile processing unit, at first glance, this seems like a great opportunity, particularly if you're looking at just custom exempt and providing a service for the farmers and their own beef. There's certainly lower startup costs in that. It's much more convenient for farmers, and it's less stress on the livestock. And you might have the potential to partner with a plant facility. That's a possibility. There are plenty of cons to consider, though. The water you use in such a process must be certified potable. The waste disposal can be an issue. There can be logistics because even a mobile facility has to be inspected, and scheduling those inspections and being at the right place at the right time can be an issue. Obviously, it's a much smaller square footage, so you have less storage space. So your per head cost increase, which reduces your profit margins. Again, the average estimated startup cost as of 2020 was around $250,000. And that included the tractor trailer, the equipment, licenses, insurance, and all of that. So a much smaller investment, but certainly research needs to be done thoroughly prior to getting into this to see if this is really a viable option for you and for the area. This is something that came from Virginia Fairs and the Matson Consulting. This was a study they did in data they gathered in 2020 using an average revenue of $466 per head. It's an estimated income for year one. The head count varying from 1,000 to 2,500 to 5,000. You can see all of the expenses that would be involved in that type of a facility, a beef-only facility. And you're looking at net income in year one is you're going to be in the negative if you're processing 1,000 head. If you get up to 2,500, you're going to see a slight net income. Obviously, the larger the facility, the larger the opportunity for income and profitability starting at year one. But again, the research needs to be done to see if that's viable. When we look at multi-species, here speaking specifically of hog, lamb, goats, as the additional species with 75% of the product being beef. You're looking at then about 1,000 head total. And in year one, you're still not going to show profitability, but a larger facility will show a little profit. You need to get up again into around the 5,000 mark to really see any decent profit margins. So here are the top 3 reasons that meat processing facilities fail. This number 1 surprised me a bit. Lack of skilled labor in management. So if you're looking to get into this endeavor, you may have the background, you may have the experience, but can you pull together a team that will, I want to say a team that will support every aspect of the business, not just the butchers, but those who are really understand the regulations, those who understand the front office, the bookkeeping, marketing, all of these things have to be taken into account. There's cost involved in all of that, and training of staff, and especially if you have turnover, the training just accumulates, costs accumulate. Number 2 is insufficient capital. So these are some interesting statistics. If financing is required for construction and outfitting, you can plan on borrowing 50 to 80% and funding 50 to 60% year 1 of the operating cost to cover the startup costs. Then there's supply continuity. I touched on this earlier. Is there really enough to sustain this year round? I kind of touched on that, Tony, and I hope I didn't, if you want me to go back to that slide, but this is where I want to turn this slide over to you. Tony Banks from Virginia Fairs supplied us with this document. And Tony, would you help us understand what you're showing here?
Certainly, and thank you for having me today, Penny. So what this slide is depicting, a lot of times when people say, well, I want to get into the meat processing business, they typically are looking at one aspect of it. And this slide is to show that there are a lot of issues that need to be taken into consideration. It's not just, oh yeah, I can process my animals if I own my own processing plant and I don't have to worry about the wait time anymore. Well, there's a whole lot that goes into that at each step, and I think a lot of people aren't aware or don't pause to think about how much is involved once you have an animal that's of harvest weight and is ready to go to slaughter. There and processing. There are a multitude of steps and places there that a business can trip up and can also succeed. Kind of earlier there, Penny, you alluded to the fact about labor. So especially with butchers, if you have an employee that has poor knife skills, if they're cutting the fat cutting the fat too hard and they're taking a lot of lean meat with it, that's money that's going out the door, or that's going into a lower value product. So there's a lot of hand labor, a lot of efficiency there, that you hope that your labor can become efficient. And it could be something as simple as making sure that whoever's operating the vacuum sealer knows how to operate it, and if a package doesn't seal completely, then they have the vision and the forethought to capture that and prevent a package from going out and potentially spoiling prematurely.
Excellent things I never would have thought about. Excellent points.
And one other thing, touching on labor, you have to keep in mind that unless you're in the front office or out on sales, you're basically standing. You're in a room that's chilled, probably 40 degrees. It's somewhere between 35 and 40 degrees. You're standing in that room all day. That's going to be wet as you're cleaning up between different slaughter and processing steps. So it's not the most pleasant environment to work in unless you like the cold and wet.
Right. So Tony, let me ask you, that brings up a question in my mind. If I have an excellent staff in place for one shift, and that's, sufficient to meet my supply, but I have my key butcher gets sick and is out for a week, what happens?
You better hope you have enough freezer space to continue slaughtering, so that you don't back up, on the receiving side. Ideally, you'll have somebody on staff that is maybe an assistant. Maybe they're not quite as proficient as the head butcher, but they're in that learning stage, and maybe what they do is work on, while that head butcher is out. Maybe the focus there is on on slaughter, hanging the primals, the quarters and the halves, and getting those ready for when that individual does return.
Okay, that's good to know. So contingency plans, I guess,
Yes.
with any business, contingency plans would be important. Okay.
And one other aspect that on the mobile slaughter facility, if it's depending on the size of the truck that's pulling that trailer, and as well as the size of the mobile unit itself, you're likely going to have someone who can process, or rather slaughter the animal and get it broke down into halves or quarters, so you can hang it before it goes back to a processing plant. But ideally, that person would also have a the appropriate driver's license to be able to operate those types of trucks,
Sure.
because that is a commercial driver's license that not just everyone can qualify for.
That's true. Now, I think I mentioned when I was speaking with you the other day, Tony, that there are less than half a dozen of these mobile units operating in the country.
Yeah, there's a few that have been around for a while, but they tend to sit in the parking lot and don't ever move. There are a couple around the country that the goal is to have them be portable, and they may be operating on a portable basis. Virginia State University has a mobile facility now. They are in the process of getting everything in place so that that trailer can move from location to location to to do small ruminant processing. They're not at the trailer, and the equipment that it's outfitted with is not of the scale that's needed for beef processing. So this would be typically, I think their intention is to focus on goat and sheep, and perhaps some hogs. But even with that program, if you're a farmer and you want to take advantage of their mobile slaughter facility, they do require that the producers attend a training course, because they're going to be required to participate in the process once the mobile unit arrives at the farm. And in addition to that, I also believe that the Virginia Department of Agriculture's Office of Meat and Poultry Services is going to require that each location where this mobile unit performs a processing is going to have to be co-permitted along with the mobile units. And to the one question I see popping up here, yes, both the mobile facility and stationary facilities they're required to meet the same standards for both sanitation and HACCP and inspection.
Good question. Excellent. Okay, good. Anything else that you want to comment on this particular slide or anything we've covered to this point?
Yeah, I
Tony?
think, the information that we've covered to this point has basically been for small to medium, and I'll call it mini region, or in some cases regional facilities. But there are, and we certainly didn't cover it when we were doing our research, but there are certainly small facilities, or very small facilities, that are basically butchers that perform slaughter or limited slaughter.
Mm,
And so there is opportunity out there, to do that and be successful. You can do that and be successful, and be custom exempt. You wouldn't necessarily
mhm,
have to pursue state or federal inspection, but
Sure.
those inspection permits certainly would open up revenue opportunities regardless of the operation size. But very small facilities, um, they can be rather successful in their own right. It's just a different market. And another thing I know, looking at this slide here, as we start talking about consumer, and the availability and demand for red meats, and the prices.
Mhm,
you know um, a small or regional facility here in Virginia is not going to be able to compete on price with the box beef that comes in from the Midwest or the Plains. So you're basically have to plan to have a consumer demand for a premium product, because you're going to have to charge premium prices
mhm.
to cover these higher per unit costs um, that you're going to incur relative to the large corporate meat processors.
Right, right. So that's really, again, in doing the due diligence prior to getting started in a feasibility study, it's important to understand, is there, and pardon the expression, an appetite in the consumer market as of right now, with the word recession looming out there every day, is the consumer willing to pay that premium price to know that they're getting locally grown beef? And I guess that's a question that I don't have the answer to, but research would certainly have to be done to see just how large is that particular consumer base.
Right. I mean, there's in a given neighborhood or community, there may only be a certain capacity for ribeyes and fillets that are,
Mhm.
are valued at 20, 25, $32 a pound. Um, and and typically, about 62% of the beef that we process goes into ground meat,
Mm,
hamburger, ground chuck.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot of hamburger that you have to sell, and you better
Uh,
hope it's going to be good, because it's going to be difficult especially with ground beef, to compete with the local large retail stores, again, that are grinding box beef out of the Midwest.
right. Can I as a consumer justify spending 30% more on ground beef just because it's local? That's an interesting thought process.
Or maybe double.
Double. Yeah, that would be a tough sell, I would think, but there no doubt is a market for it. Just how big is that market? How big is that market in this region? I
Yeah,
guess
correct.
is the
And
key.
it gets to the product, how, what's the fat content, what are people looking for?
Right.
Does the beef taste better, compared to what's available in the grocery store? Is the
Sure.
packaging better, so that it has a longer, shelf life once the consumer takes it home?
Right.
There's a host of different items there that play into that. But again,
Sure.
the consumer still has to get past that initial sticker shock when they may be used to everyday low prices.
Right. Absolutely. So getting into this type of an endeavor, let's say you've done a research, there is, and you determine that there is a market in the region for premium beef. Then you need the expertise of a marketer, right? To convince that market base, that client base, that you're the person to purchase it from, and that you're there, that make that awareness. So there's a lot of complications to it too. I see we have another question. I don't want to ignore that. Why are they able to keep their pricing low? Can you answer that one, Tony? The big box.
So the processors are able to they're able to keep their prices low, and it is a low margin business, but it's high volume.
Mm-hmm.
And so they are not processing animals from 8 to 5. They're processing animals 24/7. You know, as if prices go up because of demand, as demand increases, and they have to pay more to receive those animals in from the feedlots. You know, they're in a better position to weather that, again, because they're in the market 7 days a week, 12 months out the year, and it's a numbers game.
Right. And from what I understand, their costs are lower just partially because of volume, but also, for example, the feed that they finish the cows with to get them ready for slaughter is much less expensive in the Midwest than it is here. Thank you, Mandy. I see that. So yes, community support. I'm just touch on that again. In order to get the backing of the area municipality, whether it's the city, whether it's the county, and to get their support, they want to please their constituents. So if you're looking at, here's a perfect location for a facility, but you're in an area that the residents may be adverse to having that type of a facility nearby, it may either not be the best location, or you may have a harder time getting the permits and hiring and so forth. It just creates an uncomfortableness in the area, I guess you could say. So anytime you start any new business, I mean, that's regardless of what type of business you're starting, having community support is just key to being successful, to getting the word out, and to making everything run smoothly, if that makes sense. But particularly when you were looking at something that is potentially as sensitive as slaughtering beef and other species, it can become uncomfortable in some areas, even though we live in a very agricultural area. It's just wise to kind of feel out the area that you're thinking of putting a facility in.
And you know, I would add, if you or a client is taking this step and approaching the local government, don't go alone. If you know, if you have a number of farmers that you've already been talking to that either want to use your facility for toll processing, or maybe they plan to sell you harvest weight animals, you know, you need to have them on board when you go to talk to your local zoning officials and the board of supervisors. And again, this gets back to research. You need to be prepared for a lot of pushback, especially for the slaughter aspect, because for different reasons. Not only for the potential, I guess there's, for some people, when you say you're going to open a slaughter plant, it doesn't raise the cleanest images in people's minds. And I think they're probably thinking back maybe 40, 50 years ago, or some, maybe there was there was a facility in the area that may have previously that may have been a bad actor. Most of these processing facilities these days, even even where they're performing slaughter, it's all enclosed, it's all in one building. You do need to make sure that when you go in that you're going to be able to be prepared to talk about how you're going to handle the wastewater, the offal. Is it going to smell? Are we going to see? Is it going to be noisy and dusty? And again, I think if you can go in with some, especially if you have an architect's rendering or some sort of drawings, it's like, no, we're going to build this, this 3,000-foot metal shell building, and everything's going to be inside. The only thing that's not going to be outside is when the cattle are unloaded. They're going to be put in, they're going to be offloaded into to holding pens that are going to be, roofed and covered, and they're only going to be there a short time.
Right. So you're saying that people's images of what a slaughterhouse is may not be an accurate of what today's slaughterhouse is.
No.
Good point. So I saw there was a question on here about a kosher slaughter facility. I personally have not done any research into what the requirements are for that. Tony, do you have any input on a facility that would need to be kosher?
I know there is one halal facility in Fredericksburg, or at least they were a couple of weeks ago. They were still in business a couple of weeks ago. So there are, in addition to the standard requirements that they have to meet for inspection, there are certain religious rites that are performed on a regular basis, that primarily involving the slaughter. They may have certain exemptions to standard techniques for performing slaughter, but I'm reluctant to say definitely this is what they do and definitely this is what they don't do. Is probably a better question for one of the subsequent sessions where we're talking about regulations. But
right,
the kosher and halal, is there a market? Is there a market for those types of foods that are processed? I know certainly there's a fresh market demand for sheep and goats within the kosher and halal sectors.
Okay, good. Well, we'll make a note of that, and we'll see if we can get some information on that in next week's session then on regulations, if we can. Oops, I went too far. So again, I'm just quickly understanding the market potential. If you're looking to supply restaurants, how much of a demand is there? If you're supplied direct to consumers, are they willing to pay more? Local grocers. Oftentimes, grocers will want you to commit to a very specific volume. Will you have the supply to be able to meet that commitment? Farmers markets, that's going to involve a whole new level of marketing and work and logistics that you need to research and take into account. Putting together a business plan, starting this is your roadmap for a successful business. Every business needs one, and it's no different with starting a meat processing facility. And it makes sense to start it while you're starting your research. It'll help you know what to research, and the research will also feed into your business plan. They'll kind of work together. Performing a SWOT analysis is always a good idea at the very outset and then on a regular basis. Starting out with what strengths do you and your team bring to the venture? What talent can you recruit locally? And what advantages can your business bring to the market? Be realistic about acknowledging your weaknesses. Nobody has it all. So what is it that you and your team are lacking? And can that void be filled with local talent or regional talent? And what are the opportunities you have in the area to what gaps will your business be able to fill? And then what are some threats that you'll encounter along the way? What are some of the biggest challenges to actually starting and continuing to operate a viable, profitable facility? Just a quick overview of what the business plan should, the components would be an executive summary, a description of your business, biographies of you and your team, your mission, your vision, a competitive analysis. What is your business model? How big is your facility going to be? Are you going to be an LLC? Are you going to be a C Corp, S Corp? How are you actually, what type of model are you using? What is your go-to-market strategy? What's your financial plan? And contingency plans are really going to be important. And then, of course, attaching all of your research paperwork to the business plan is going to be important. Just to mention that next week at this time, we'll talk about regulations. We're going to have Peyton Lee here from VDAX to cover that information. Again, not getting all the way deep into it. We're not going to teach you everything you need to know, but it will be about creating the awareness of what you need to know as far as regulations go. And then finally on July 20th, excuse me, I have the wrong dates in here, don't I? I apologize. The 27th, next week, the 20th and the 27th will be on funding. And we're going to have Stephen Verson here talking about what monies are available and what do you need to know about that funding. So we do still have a little time left, so I want to open it up. If there are any other questions, please feel free to put in the chat box or raise your hand. I can't quite see everyone. See if I can expand this to see everybody. Let's see, Cindy.
Penny,
Jim?
I have a couple of questions. The first question I actually got yesterday, and as you talked about the mobile slaughter units, most of us are accustomed to the fact that typically if you take an animal to be slaughtered, they hang for, typically 30 days plus or minus, at least 30 usually. So how is that handled with these mobile slaughter units? That's my first question. And then I have a follow-on question for that mobile unit as well.
Tony, do you have an answer to that?
So my understanding is that most mobile slaughter units, they actually perform the task of the slaughter, and have a full carcass, or they split the carcass into halves and hang it, and then they typically return to a facility where the carcass is further processed and allowed to age in the cooler. Now, some mobile units, they will perform all of the tasks there. So if you, and this is going to be mostly for smaller ruminants and poultry. There are some mobile poultry units that I think the closest one to Virginia is at Delaware State Valley University up in Pennsylvania has one that they move around. But so the hanging tends to be more of an issue for beef, and there really aren't that many small facilities that are set up for beef, but typically they would have to bring that carcass back to a processing facility to let it age, and also to create the value added products.
So do you see opportunities for there to be a smaller facility where the carcasses would hang and then be further processed?
Yes, yes. T- So the different people that we have talked to in the past have expressed interest in mobile processing, mobile slaughter, rather. Their primary interest is that they're concerned about shrink or weight loss once as the animal's being transported to the slaughter facility. They're also concerned that the animal may be stressed, and once the animal becomes stressed, and depending on the level of stress, there may be certain hormones that are released, and some people believe that that may affect the say the taste of the carcass. So like I said, most of the people that I've talked to over the years, it's been from the quality of the animal at the time that it's actually being slaughtered, the condition of the animal. um, I think there are some people today that are looking at it more as a convenience item, but that's typically going to be for your small ruminants or poultry.
But it sounds doable with, if you were just doing one beef at a time.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, then my
The-
follow-on question is, and I guess if this is how it works, this will probably answer this, but if that mobile unit slaughters and does any kind of packaging, is that mobile unit able to get USDA certified packaging certification?
um, if they can figure out a way to get all that equipment onto the trailer and meet the standards, I don't see why not. I um, I know the mobile unit at Virginia State University is nearly completed or has completed the steps it needs to take for a certificate of inspection. But at this point, I'm at a loss as to how much processing they do on site, or what type of packaging. Again, that's small animals, small livestock. Um, but you they have a whole web page devoted to that at Virginia State.
And I was going to also ask you if you could give us in the chat window information about that. And you mentioned that there were ways for farmers to access that mobile unit. And how would one go about getting in contact with them to find out more about that?
All right, I'm going to pull up that link, and I'm going to post it in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. See, there was also a question, and I know I've seen one. So Riaz is asking, would there be any spreadsheet for calculating expenses for a medium-sized facility? I have seen it, and I can't remember where I saw it. Tony, do you have such a tool?
We don't per se have we don't have a fill in the blank budget or anything like that. One possible option would be the Oklahoma State niche meat processing.
Right.
And while I'm thinking about that, the with all the COVID and post-pandemic money that Congress and USDA have been putting out for food processing and especially meat processing, there is they have centered or focused their resources on one web page, and I'm going to post that up as well. This will have a link to the niche meat processing center at OSU.
Thank you, Tony. And in the, so everyone knows, a lot of the data that I was able to find has come from that website. It's extremely helpful website for anyone who is looking to start a meat processing facility of any type. And it's in Pam, the niche marketing niche meat processors association network or something like that. I had it down just a little while ago and I'm drawing a blank, but it's a very helpful website. And I want to mention too that in addition to this particular session being available, the recorded session being available soon, there will be a PDF version of this presentation, which you saw on your screen, will also be available, that Cindy or Mandy will be disseminating. And we're also going to have a guide that has all of the links to all of these different resources in that guide. And I know they're going to make that available to you too. Yes, there it is. He's put in for the USDA government meat site. So we're going to have links to all of that in the guide that's coming also. Cindy or Mandy, do you have anything else to add? I don't want
I
to
was going to ask one more question, Tony. You
Yes.
mentioned custom exemptions for small facility slaughter. Do you have any resource links on that or anything else you'd want to offer on that?
Yes. Let's see.
Yes, and guys get into regulations.
Okay.
Is one item. Bear with me. Custom exempt, there's still requirement. In certain requirements, it's not like you can't go out and do willy-nilly.
Right.
But on the marketing side, the biggest difference is that you're not able to sell those end products directly to consumers. Basically, the owner is paying for the processing. And there we go.
Just not letting me pull that up.
So there is. I tell you what, this is going to. Here we go. I'm going to post the main page for the MeatX Office of Meat and Poultry Services. One of the publications that you will see when you arrive at that page includes red meat custom exemptions.
Great. Thank you, Tony. I was going to share because I'm recording on through my Zoom here. It's not letting me pull anything up.
There we go. And they let's see, on this page, they also have a flow chart that you can follow through, and depending on how you want to operate your business or how you think you'd like to operate your business, then you can find out which you have a general idea of which regulations that you would need to comply with. So I mean, so for example, let's say you're farming, you're raising your cattle, you're taking your animals to a federal inspected plant, they are processing it, or it could be a state inspected plant, and you're gonna sell retail cuts of meat from let's say a farm shop, or a little shop there on the farm, or maybe you open up a small storefront in a neighboring community. You're still going to have be covered under a handler's permit, because even if you're selling cuts of meat at the farmer's market, there is still a requirement at the very least to make sure, well, one, each one of those products has to be properly labeled. Um, and there's the most basic requirement is that everything has to be held at a certain temperature. So you don't want to, you don't want that hamburger to jump up to 50, 55 degrees and, in the Igloo cooler or the Coleman cooler, while you're sitting there, behind the table at the farmer's market. So, typically if you go to a farmer's market and you see someone selling meat, different cuts of meat or seafood, they will, if they're using coolers, they've got a ton of ice to keep the temperature down, or they may be using dry ice, or alternatively they're using a freezer or a refrigerator to maintain temperature so that there reduces the risk of spoilage.
You want to make sure that any consumers who do buy your product at a meat market, they have the ability to get it home safely at a safe temperature also.
That's true. That's true. And some vendors will, they'll have refrigerated bags that, they may or may not have a logo. You can purchase some rather simple insulated shopping bags that will keep that product chilled, long enough to take it home. And those aren't real expensive. So
Right.
that could be an additional item that you could have for sale.
Sure.
It depends on how many people forget to bring their bag.
That's all.
When does it
That would
become
be
a
me.
service and when does it become a co-product, right?
Right. That would be me. Cindy, Mandy, anything else?
No, I was just gonna maybe wrap us up. I think Tony, you summarized in 2 words, or a few words, what you think you want to do versus what you end up doing too. And I'm adding that second part. So that's really the point of this series for everyone, is we know that a lot of individuals and producers and other people across Virginia have seen the shortage, the supply chain issue associated with meat, whether that be red meat, white meat, all the above. And so we are just trying to create a series of basic information to help you figure out what you think you want to do versus what you might end up doing. So to summarize that and what's being said, this was, of course, our first overview about those few of those resources to you. We'll make sure you get that after this is done. Like Penny said, there is a guide that's going to be included with the slides, and I'm sure that we're going to make sure all the information that Tony gave to us today is in that. I think it might be, but we'll make sure of that before sending it out. And then just to remind you that next week on Wednesday is going to concentrate again on the regulatory side of the meat processing. So please be sure to sign up for that if you're interested in it. And that summarizes me for today. It looks like we had one more comment that A1 Custom Meats in Clayton, North Carolina is kosher and religious specialty, is kosher and religious killing. So that actually interests me. I mean, I think that's something we definitely need to look into and make sure we're finding that information out, which is one of the reasons I love these workshops. We also get questions that we go, hey, we don't know the answer, but what we hope to do is be a resource to direct you in the right place. So I'm sure we'll all be looking into that and see what we come up with. Penny, any last words?
No, thank you very much. I have contact information up here on the screen, but again, this will also be included in the materials that you'll receive via email, and looking forward to seeing everyone next week and hearing what questions you have then.
Okay.
I am going to ask one more question before everyone jumps off. We've been checking our registration just to make sure that we have everyone listed correctly. And I see we had a couple people join on a little bit towards the end. Stephanie Baker, could you tell me how you are registered? You're listed. Okay, I just answered my own question. Found you. Had one more. There was a Robert that jumped on late, and then the Dillon family. Just trying to determine how you all were registered. If you all could unmute and the Tim Dillon family and
This is Valita Stewart, Finney Stewart.
you were registered as Finney Stewart. Okay, great. Thank you so much. And it looks like maybe we lost Robert somewhere along the way, so I'm not sure. Okay, that concludes my questions.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and looking forward to seeing everybody next week. And thank you, Tony. Appreciate your insights.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks, Tony.
Take care.
Bye-bye. I'm going to stop recording.